Hello and welcome to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. I'm Helly and I'm here to provide regular bursts of information and inspiration, some neuroscience applicable to eating disorder recovery, perhaps a few rants, but otherwise lots of positivity with a bit of a feck it attitude, some fun and a sprinkling of fabulousness to help everyone find freedom in recovery. Hi, welcome to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. My name's Helly. I'm a professional coach working with people in recovery from eating disorders and disordered eating. Today's episode is about the fact that when you're in eating disorder recovery, a really useful tactic to use is to make sure that each and every day you're in recovery, you are aiming to make that day better than your best day in recovery so far. Why am I saying this? The eating disorder mindset is really quite unique, and it involves a lot of thought patterns that are actually very irrational, but yet very common to most of us with the illness. And one of these thought patterns is the way that the eating disordered brain will cling on to what we did yesterday or on the same day last week perhaps, in terms of eating or in terms of movement or other eating disordered behaviours, and use that as the maximum benchmark of how much we eat or how much we rest today. So, have you ever found yourself in recovery, you're doing a lot better, you're eating more, you're resting more, and then for whatever reason you have a day where there's perhaps a small lapse in your recovery. Maybe you eat a little bit less than you have been eating. Maybe you miss a snack for some reason. Or perhaps you're a bit more active than you have been for a little while. All of a sudden, you might find that getting back on track again, in terms of eating disorder recovery, to the level you were at in recovery terms just 2 days ago, can feel like an impossible task. Because the eating disordered brain is sneaky and it will say, well, you didn't eat that snack or as much as that yesterday, so you really don't need to today. Or perhaps you took that longer route when you went to the shops yesterday, so you have to go that way again. And this is an eating disorder trait that seems to be common to nearly everybody with an eating disorder. This need to compare to yesterday or to compare to the same day last week and not exceed our intake compared to then, not exceed how much we rested compared to then. And I'm not sure I really understand the reason behind this common mindset. It might just be that it is a case of the good old eating disordered fear factor coming into play and the terrified brain using whatever seemingly rational thoughts it can generate to push us back to what it deems safer territory in terms of restriction, in terms of movement. And the fear we'd faced in taking actions to increase our eating or resting has not had long enough yet to become ingrained and feel safe enough to our brain. And so as soon as we take our foot off the gas and take even the smallest step back from that fear, our brain just goes straight back into reasons not to walk into that fear again. But whatever the reason behind this mindset and these thought patterns, in recovery it's really important to become hyper aware of them and just recognise that every tiny morsel of food you eat does matter, and it can't be any less than yesterday, and ideally should always be much more than the day before. And other behaviours too have to stay 100% on track, or else you face that uphill battle to get back to where it was, or you might just find that you slowly slide back into the eating disorder's grips again. Establishing recovery patterns of eating and resting more, facing a fear food or breaking other disordered behaviours takes massive energy in overcoming mental hurdles and really does require superhuman effort. But let that slide at all and ultimately you're going to have to overcome the same fear and anxiety over again to hurdle that mental barrier again, because that mental barrier has just gone straight back up there. And this mindset of, always comparing to the day before or whatever it was and not wanting to exceed the day before, is actually one that's really hard for family, friends, or health professionals to understand in terms of just how strong and powerful it can be. Because to anyone outside of an eating disordered brain, missing a tiny bit of food out the day because of unforeseen circumstances, or going for perhaps a nice family walk that might not normally have been part of our routine, will just appear inconsequential to the bigger picture to them. It won't occur to someone with a healthy brain why or how an eating disordered brain can latch on to such a small change, and that those small changes will then make it 100 times harder for you tomorrow to stay firmly in recovery. But one tiny lapse in a day in an eating disordered brain can become monstrous, to the point, as I said before, that it could be the start of a snowball effect back to the illness if it's not caught and addressed quickly. And for me, that's another reason why in my recovery I've found diving into recovery headfirst and really fast felt much safer and more productive than going at recovery in a much slower, methodical approach. Because when you've got these kind of disordered thought patterns to contend with, if you're increasing your eating by just a tiny morsel each day and missing out that morsel on another day, then the already painfully hard process of plodding through recovery becomes even more drawn out and even more traumatic and even more exhausting in the longer term, and so you're more at risk of giving up altogether. But if you can just barge through those mental barriers every day, keep pushing forward faster, and then a tiny lapse in one day is perhaps a bit less critical if it's caught quickly. So all of this ramble is to say that any lapse in your day-to-day recovery from restrictive eating disorders really does matter, even if they are tiny. You need to be able to catch them, and you need to be able to pick yourself up on them and eat 20 times as much the following day. Being aware of this thought pattern in your recovery is really one of the key things to helping you stay on track of your recovery journey. And yes, everybody's going to have days when their eating is going to be a bit less, or you're naturally a bit more active than you might otherwise be. But it's recognizing that has happened, being vigilant about it, and knowing that it's going to make the following day that bit more difficult to get back to the level you were at. And so, really making extra effort to make up for it. And that's why I say to clients, when you're in recovery, each and every day, look at the best day you've had in recovery so far. So look at the day in recovery you've had so far where you ate the most, you rested the most, you really overcame more fears than you have in a day otherwise. And look at that day and aim to make this day better than that day was by far. So each and every day in recovery, you're looking at your best day in recovery and you're aiming to exceed it by 1,000,000 miles. And that way you're going to keep yourself as safely into your recovery, always pushing forward in a way that's hopefully going to get you to that finish line with a bit more confidence and a bit more quickly. Because ultimately, eating disorder recovery is constantly pushing yourself in the direction that's the most anxiety provoking. Every day you have to be aiming higher in terms of food and rest, and even in terms of your weight gain. Aim for weight gain, take on that mentality, because that's the mentality that breaks down the eating disorder. Keep up that upward momentum, don't look back, and that recovery and freedom will be yours sooner than you know. So I hope that's been a useful little nugget of motivation for today's episode. I really hope that eating disorder recovery is going well for you. If you do, though, want to know about my coaching services, then please look at my website, which is hellybarnes.com. And otherwise, I will catch you in my next episode. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Feck It Fun, Fabulous and Free Eating Disorder Recovery podcast. Don't forget, eating disorder recovery doesn't have to be boring and doesn't have to be serious. Now go and grab yourself some food and have a fabulous rest of the day.